Hello everyone. We will see service to service communication. In microservices, if one microservice wants to talk with the other microservice. Example, I have a student service here. Student service wants to fetch books information from books service. So one microservice, if it wants to talk with another microservice in terms of if you want to create books, or if you want to fetch books, or if you want to update or delete, if you want to make any calls to service to, in how many ways we can do that. We have three options here. One is by using REST template, you can do that. You can make call from microservice 1 to microservice 2, and the second option is Feign client. You have using Feign client you can make call from one microservice to another microservice, and you have third option here, which is web client. Using web client also you can make call. Then what is the difference between them? REST template is a simple way to make a call from one microservice to another microservice. In case, sir, I'm using a load balancing concept, a gateway concept, is it good to use REST template or any other options I have? So if you have load balancer and all, and Feign client is a ideal approach in Spring Cloud environment. Feign client is going to provide a lot of support to you, so it is easy to use Feign client in case if you have load balancing support and all. So both are synchronous, right? If you make call from service 1 to service 2, you will make a synchronous call. If there is any delay in the response, you should wait. Microservice 1 will wait response from the microservice 2 via REST template when you make a call. Same way Feign client also will work in a synchronous way. Using Feign client you can make a call from one microservice to another microservice. This is one of the easiest way. And you have third option, which is asynchronous way. You can use web client to make calls from one service to another service. Let's see example how they will work. We will create two microservices. One is books microservice and other is student microservice, and we will make calls from student microservice to books service. Okay, so let's see. Yeah, first I'll show you books microservice. Here I created one books microservice, and this service is running in port 9090, and here is the books service implementation. So I have a books controller here. If you see the code, so this is a simple REST controller, and to call these methods of the REST controller we have request mapping API slash books service slash version 1, and here is the implementation. When I want to create a book, I will be using post mapping, and I am sending a books object as a input, and I am adding that book object into a collection map here. I am not using any database, just showing you with the map object. I am just adding my book using book ID, same book ID, and book object is storing here. Same way I have implemented other HTTP methods. If you want to update existing book, you can update, just checking whether the book is existing in the map object or not. If book ID is not empty in the map object, I am just updating it. Once again I am calling put method with the same ID, so book object will be updated. If not, I am sending bad request response. Same way delete method implemented. And get using ID, if I give a book ID, I am just returning one book object here. I am just returning one book object here from map. And if it is a simple get call, get all method, select all books, I am just returning all the map elements. Okay, so this is how I implemented. And what I have in this book object, if you open this book object, right, we have few elements here: ID, name, author, and the release date. Okay, and these parameters I need to send from UI so that it will be stored into a map object, I'm using this map object as a database, simple collection I'm using here to store that data. Okay, how I can test this books service I created? I want to share this API with the student service team. Okay, so you two people are working on book service and other two members are working on student service. How they know about our APIs or how we implemented these methods? Yeah, so to share your API, we have Swagger here. Swagger we have. Using Swagger, you can provide the documentation how you implemented your methods. You need not to share all your HTTP methods. You need not to talk about your methods. You need not to tell this is how post method I implemented, put method I implemented. You need not to explicitly tell. Instead, right, you just add one Swagger dependency here. Open APIs, Spring Docs Open API dependency you add, it is going to provide Swagger documentation. Okay, and here we are telling that Spring document need to generate which all paths are matching to /API. So will it cover our books controller or not? Automatically it will cover, because it will match with your request mapping. So when you run your application, right, Swagger will generate a document by default to your class. So let me show you how it will generate. Let's run your books service, run this books service and see how Swagger document is generated. Okay, now Spring application is up and running. Okay, let's go to UI and verify it. Here you can see books service is running in port number 9090. Let's access that port and see will Swagger document is provided or not. Here I am entering the localhost URL 9090 Swagger UI /index.html. So this is the default namespace or URL that you can use after your port number, so that it will provide you Swagger UI. So this is default generated UI using Swagger. You can see Swagger UI is generated and you can see all your HTTP methods. So you can share this Swagger URL with student service so that they can see what are all methods available in your controller. They can understand. So here if you see, one get method is available, one put method, post method, delete method, and get with path parameter is available. Okay, so if you want to test it, sir, I want to create a book object. How I can test, sir? Go to this post method, expand it, click on try it out, and here you can give your data. So default request body it will give you. So enter book ID, book name Spring by Naveen, author Naveen, and this is the date. Execute it, and finally you could able to see the response here. So one book object created, finally you have response 202, just we returned from there, and this is the response. So your book is able to create here. Sir, I want to create one more book, sir. Yes, you can create book number 2, Spring Boot by Naveen, author Naveen. Execute it. One more book is created. Shall I check that records? Shall I fetch that records using get methods? Yes, you have get all method. Open get all method, try it out, click on execute. You can see the response, 2 books which we created, which is stored into map object, right? We used ID itself as a key, so using that key 1, the first object is stored. Using ID 2, second object is stored. So I can able to see my records also here. Now the challenge is, now the question is how I can able to call this books controller from my student service. Okay, let's create student service and try to call this implementation. Already I created some books here, right? Let's try to access these books or try to create one more book from student service. Let's create student service and try to fetch this books controller methods. So here is your student service implementation. I implemented one more service, student service. So let's see. First approach by using REST template. As I said, right, there are three approaches. You can make calls by using REST template, Feign client, and web client. First approach we will see using REST template, how we can make calls from student service to books service. Let's create student service and make calls via REST template. So here is my student service. From student service I will call books service, which is running in port number 9090. Okay, so first thing what I will do here, I'll create a REST template object. I need a configuration class, or you can use @Spring Boot application class for instantiating any beans. Okay, so I'm using @Spring Boot application and initializing a bean. Which bean? REST template object I'm creating here. So one REST template object creating, and I'm going to use this REST template to fetch data from books service. Okay, so books REST client I implemented here. Let's open books REST client. Okay, so I created one books service with the REST template as auto void, and the base URL of your books service is, actual URL is http://localhost 9090 API books service version 1. So this is the complete path of your books service. Now let's see how I am making calls here. I want to create a book. From student service. Okay, so student service is giving one input of book. How I am sending this book object to books service. So here I am creating HTTP headers. So in this HTTP headers I am setting content type JSON. So I want to send this books input as a JSON to this via this REST template to this URL. So I am using REST template dot exchange method and given this URL here, and which method I need to call in books service, in books controller. If I open, right, so this is the post method. Create book is the post method, and this post method will take book input. So from REST client what I am doing, I am giving URL and expressing my method, post method, and this is my request entity, this is my input. I created one HTTP entity as a request, and I'm feeding my book object here as an input, including headers. I'm giving that as a request here, and finally I'm expecting response of books. So that same response it is returning here, response entity of books. Similar way I made other calls. If you want to update book, I'm using REST template dot exchange method, given base URL, and the method I'm telling HTTP method put. So here you have put method in books controller to update record. So I'm calling that by using REST template exchange, by using put method. Same way you can call delete method, REST template dot exchange URL, and giving which method it is, delete method. And finally once it is deleted, maybe if you want to return a book object which is returned, you can return it. And here is the select book. One book I want to fetch using book ID. There I have one get method. So I'm giving my base URL plus I'm appending this ID in the path. So when I append a ID in the path, which method it will trigger? This get method will trigger when you append something in the path. So this get method is called, and one book object will be returned to you. And I have finally one more method, select all books. So what I am doing here, calling exchange base URL get method, and no input is required. Finally I am expecting a map output. So as this is a map object, right, a collection object, I am using parameterized type reference to get that complex object instead of giving a direct map here, right? Map is not allowed, that's why I'm using parameterized type reference and passing my map object, so that finally it will return map object when your student service called. Okay, so this service I am auto wiring. This service is implemented in which API? Student API. And the service class I am calling in my controller, I'm calling in my student controller. If you go to student controller, right, so here you can call books rest client. Books rest client I'm using here, and using this rest client I'm calling all the methods: create method, update method, delete method. Okay, and this is the URL for books service. And to test books service, again here I added Swagger. You remember, right? We need Swagger to test it. Swagger will provide default documentation. We can use that. So I just added here a Swagger dependency, so that we can get Swagger documentation for student service also. Let's run student service. Let's run student service. Okay, so let me show you in which port number it is running. Student service is running in port, okay, student service is running in port number 9191. Let's open browser. So here is my localhost 9090 books service. Let me open one more tab, 9191 service I will call. What is running in 9191? Student service. You can see a student service is running here. You can see student service, books web client controller, books web client. Sorry, we need REST client implementation, right? So just let me go back to implementation and see. Actually I have 3 implementations. Yeah, so student controller, this is the one which we used for REST template based calls. Okay, I already implemented 3 calls. One is by using web client, Fin client, and REST client. So this is the REST client implementation that just we did. Okay, now I'll show you get all function. You can test remaining. Okay, so already I created books here, right? In the books service I created already books. So if I try to execute it, I can see all the list of books which are created in books service. Now I will call them from student service. Execute. When I call from student service also, I would able to get the response. So this is how you can make calls. Okay, I made call from 9191 application. To which application? I call to 9090 application, which is running as a books service. Similarly, the remaining implementations also we did here. Let's test them. Okay, so using web client I implemented, Fin client also implemented. I'll show you the implementations. Just see the execution, how they are executing. Okay, so here is the web client implementation. So if I open web client implementation, get all function I will call. Try it, execute. Using web client also now I executed, I got the response. Same way, test it by using Fin client also. Select all, try it out, execute. You see, we got the response using Fin client also. How you implemented the other 2 APIs, sir? Let me show you. Go back to your IDE and see the implementations. Let me open student service. Okay, I'll show you Fin client implementation, how I implemented Fin client. So for Fin client you need not to provide lengthy implementation. Instead what you can do, you create a interface like a JPA repository. You need not to provide any implementations. Just provide a interface and annotate with the Fin client and give your base URL, books service URL here. So I just configured this books service URL in application properties file. Go back to your student service application properties. Here I given books service URL. My book service is running in 9090. So localhost 9090 will be given here, and using that localhost 9090/API books service v1, it is going to execute post method, put method, delete, get, with id get all also. So at runtime, implementations will be provided to this Fin client. You need not to provide any implementation. If you see REST template, if you see REST template here, when I use REST template, I did lot of implementation. For post method, see, this is this much implementation I did. But when I use Fin client, see, I don't have any implementation. I just have a method. I just have a method with simple signature, and whichever naming conventions you want to use, you can use create, update, delete, select all, annotate with exact methods, and here use the exact signature which this URL post method is accepting. That's it. Implementation will be generated. And one more interesting thing, why I used this name here. When we use gateway with load balancers, right? In that scenario, we need not to pass directly hard-coded URLs here. So dynamically your Fin client can ask Eureka. Fin client can approach Eureka, which is the current book service running, in which instance it is running. It will execute that particular instance only. That's why is a Fin client is recommended, right, in microservices environment, because we don't know actual URL. Every time we can't supply URL here. Instead of supplying URL, just your service name. Eureka is aware of your service URL. It will supply automatically to your Fin client. And how you implemented web clients are here. So let's open web client service. See how I implemented. So this is the web client service. I just auto-void web client builder here. So as I auto-void here, somewhere I must created this web client, right? So web client I have initialized here. Web client is initialized. Web client is initialized here. You can see. Okay. So before that, to enable Fin client, we used enable Fin client annotation, and so that it is enabling all your Fin clients. So just give whichever package your Fin client is in, so it will activate them. Okay, for web client actually need not to auto-wire anything. I mean need not to initialize anything. So when I add web client dependency, by default web client builder is created with the default configurations, and that is supplied to you. So for web client I have added a dependency here. Which dependency? WebFlux dependency I added. Spring Boot starter WebFlux. It is going to provide you web client. For Fin client I added open Fin client dependency. And what about REST template? REST template is available in your web dependency itself. Okay, I have three types of dependencies here. Now coming back to your web client implementation, I just auto-void web client builder object. I auto-void here. Now using this web client builder, you can make a call web client builder dot. It used builder pattern. So you know, when you use builder pattern, you can able to call methods of this implementation directly. Every time builder will return the same object. So on that same object, I am calling post method, which HTTP method want to call, and what is the URI. So this is the URI of my books service, and what is the content type? This is the content type, and the body, which request you want to send. I am sending a books request. Finally, do you have response? Yes. Retrieve. What I am retrieving? Books itself I am retrieving. Same thing you can observe with the update also. Put method I am using here. Put method, and the remaining stuff is same. And what about delete method? Using HTTP delete method, almost the remaining implementation is same. And what about get a single book? I'm using a get method and giving URI here with the complete path parameter and the path value. Retrieve the body, same books object I am trying to expecting here. And when I use get all method, same thing, get method, same URI without any path parameter, retrieve, and expecting a complete map object. Map will hold list of book objects. Okay, so when we tested it, we got the list of map objects, right, that we observed. And you can see the response type. Everywhere we are using mono. Okay, so we are using web flux here. This is useful for asynchronous calls. When you have asynchronous implementation, in your application. If you don't want to block your calls, right, if you want to execute them in parallel, if you don't want to black with your current thread, right, you can go with web client implementation. Okay, so these three are the ways that we have to provide service to service access. Okay, so once again you can see the student controller is implemented using a REST template, and this one is implemented by using Fin client, and this one is implemented by using web client. Okay, hope this is clear. I'll show you in the next implementation how to use how to use Eureka as a load balancer when I configure, right, my multiple instances of book service when they register to Eureka via API gateway, how I can make all such calls, right, from, as I said, right, every request which is from front end or microservice to microservice communication, you better route them through API gateway. It helps you to balance the load as well. Okay, so this is the most useful approach in the microservices environment. So I'll show you how to integrate Eureka and gateway in the current application, and we will see how load balancing also working. That we will see in the next discussion. Thank you all.